The boy wasn't moving. That was the first thing Marion saw, a small body crumpled against the wet asphalt like something discarded, rain coming down so hard it was almost loud, and not a single person on that sidewalk doing anything except standing there with their phones raised. She was already moving before she made the decision to move. "Call 911, she shouted, dropping to her knees beside him. Nobody answered. A woman in a yellow raincoat actually stepped back. The boy couldn't have been older than 7. His forehead was bleeding, a deep, ugly cut above his left eye, and his breathing came in these shallow little pulls that told Marion everything she needed to know. She pressed her coat against the wound without hesitating. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steadier. "Hey! Hey, look at me!" She tilted his chin gently. "What's your name?" His eyes fluttered. Dark brown, glassy with pain and shock. He tried to speak and couldn't. "That's okay. You don't have to talk. I've got you." She leaned over him, shielding his face from the rain. "You hear me? I've got you." Someone in the crowd said something she couldn't make out. Someone else laughed, nervous, uncomfortable, the way people laugh when they don't know what else to do with themselves. Marion blocked all of it out. She had a gift for that. Blocking out everything that wasn't the thing that mattered. The boy's fingers moved, reached, found the sleeve of her coat and held on. And just for a second, just one flicker of a second, something pulled at the edge of her memory. A different kind of cold. Not rain. Air conditioning. A boardroom in Seoul, all glass and steel and silence, and a man in an expensive suit looking straight through her like she wasn't there. She pushed it away. "Not now. Stay with me, baby," she whispered. "Just stay with me." The ambulance was 3 minutes out. She knew because she'd called them herself while everyone else was still deciding whether to get involved. She kept one hand firm on the wound and one hand resting lightly on the boy's chest, feeling the rise and fall, counting it, willing it to stay even. Then the engines came. Not one. Several. The sound was different from regular traffic. Lower, deliberate, the kind of sound that clears space before it arrives. Marion looked up. 3 black SUVs had stopped in the middle of the street, rain hitting their hoods in silver sheets. Men in dark suits were out before the engines cut, spreading across the sidewalk with a practiced efficiency that had nothing to do with concern and everything to do with control. People scattered without being told to. Then one man walked through all of it like it didn't exist. He wasn't the largest man there. He wasn't moving fast. But something about the way he moved, the absolute stillness of his face, the way every other man in that crowd adjusted their position when he passed, made the air change. He stopped when he saw the boy. Everything stopped. Marion watched his face. She'd spent enough years reading rooms to know what she was looking at. This wasn't a stranger. The way his breath left him, that single, controlled exhale that was actually the sound of a man preventing himself from falling apart, that was a father. He dropped to one knee. Not gracefully. Like something gave out. His hand reached toward the boy's face, then stopped, hovering an inch away, like he was afraid to touch him and break something. "Ji-ho." His voice was barely above a whisper. Raw in a way that didn't match the suit, the cars, the men standing in formation behind him. "Ji-ho-ya." The boy's fingers tightened on Marion's sleeve. The man looked up. His eyes found her, really found her, not just the woman kneeling in the rain, but her, specifically, and something moved across his face that she couldn't immediately name. "You." He stopped, looked at his son, looked back at her. The rain was soaking through his jacket now, and he didn't seem to notice. "You saved my son." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even gratitude yet. It was a man trying to locate himself inside something that hadn't finished happening. Marion held his gaze. And in that moment, in the space between his words and her response, she felt the ground shift beneath her. Not literally, not the wet asphalt, but something deeper. Something that had been still for years suddenly wasn't. Because she knew that face. Not him, specifically, but the structure behind it. The name behind it. The history behind it. Lee. The ambulance turned onto the street, lights cutting through the rain. One of the suited men said something in Korean, quick, clipped. The man in front of her didn't look away from Marion. "What is your name?" he asked. Quiet. Careful. Like the answer mattered more than he wanted it to. Marion looked at him for one long beat. "Marion Ellis," she said. And she watched something change in his eyes. Not surprise. Something more complicated than surprise. Something that looked almost like recognition, followed immediately by something that looked almost like dread. He knew that name. The question was how. And what exactly. It meant that she was kneeling in the rain in front of him, holding his son's life in her hands, 7 years after the last time anyone in his family had said her name out loud. The paramedics reached them. Hands. Equipment. Voices. Movement. Marion stood slowly, stepped back, let them work. She didn't run. She wasn't the kind of woman who ran. But she understood, standing there in the rain with her coat soaked through and her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, that whatever she thought she'd left behind her, whatever she thought she'd finished and closed and walked away from, was standing 10 feet away in a wet suit, watching her with eyes that already knew too much. If you've ever had to stand alone to protect your dignity, this channel was made for you. Welcome. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and bad coffee, and the particular kind of silence that collects in places where people are afraid. Marion sat in a chair near the window, her coat folded in her lap. Ruined, probably, but she wasn't ready to think about that yet. The rain had slowed outside. The clock above the nurse's station read 9:47 p.m. She should have left 20 minutes ago. She knew that. She'd told herself that. She'd even stood up once, gathered her things, gotten as far as the exit doors before something stopped her. Not sentiment. Something more honest than sentiment. The feeling that leaving before she knew the boy was stable would be a kind of abandonment she wasn't capable of. So she sat. The man, Lee Min-ho, she now knew, because one of his suited men had said his name twice in the first 5 minutes, was across the room with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, rapid Korean. He hadn't sat down once. He moved like a man who'd forgotten how to be still, pacing a short, controlled line between the window and the wall. Twice he'd looked over at her. Not casually. Deliberately. The way you look at something you're trying to understand. She looked back both times. She wasn't going to pretend she hadn't noticed. On his third pass, he ended the call. Slid the phone into his pocket. Crossed the room with the same measured walk from the street and stopped in front of her. Not close enough to crowd, far enough to be asking permission. "You're still here," he said. "I am." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "I wanted to know he was okay." Something moved across his face. Not quite gratitude, deeper than that. More private. He pulled out the chair beside her, looked at it, then sat down like a man who hadn't sat in a long time. "They say he'll be fine," Min-ho said. "Mild concussion. 3 stitches. He was asking for water when they took him back." Marion exhaled. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding. "Good," she said simply. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Weighted. The kind of silence that exists between two people who both know more than they're saying. Min-ho leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. "He was alone," he said, and his voice dropped on those 2 words in a way that had nothing to do with Marion and everything to do with himself. "He shouldn't have been alone." "No," Marion said. "He shouldn't have." She didn't soften it. Didn't add anything to ease the sting. She wasn't cruel about it, just honest. And he received it the way a man receives something he already knows is true. "I wasn't there." He said it flatly. Factual. Like a man reading a verdict against himself. "I'm not there enough." She didn't respond to that. It wasn't her confession to manage. Outside, a car alarm went off and then stopped. A nurse moved past them with a clipboard. Min-ho was still looking at the floor, and Marion was studying him the way she studied most things. Quietly, thoroughly, without announcing herself. He was not what she expected. She'd built a version of him in her mind over the years, assembled from fragments, from what she knew about the family, from the one photograph she'd seen in a Seoul business brief a decade ago. Younger then. Harder-faced. All performance. The man beside her was still hard, but differently. like something had been pressed against him for a long time and left a mark. Her mind drifted. She let it go this time, just briefly. She was back in Seoul. 7 years ago. A glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor, her presentation loaded on the screen, her notes in order. She'd worked on that strategy for 6 weeks. Restructuring the Lee Group's international development pipeline. It was good work. She knew it was good work. Dae-jun had walked in 12 minutes late, glanced at the screen, and taken the seat at the head of the table as though it had always belonged to him. He let her present for 4 minutes. 4. Then he interrupted with a question about something peripheral, redirected the conversation, and by the time the meeting ended, somehow her framework had become an initial concept we've been developing internally. She remembered the walk back to her office. The sound of her own heels on that marble floor. She remembered deciding, in that corridor, that she would not cry. Not there. Not where he could see it. Not where any of them could see it. She never cried over it. Not once. Ms. Ellis. She came back to the waiting room. Min-ho was looking at her now, directly, without the earlier careful distance. "You worked with my family before," he said. "Didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Not quite. It sat in the space between a question and a statement, like he was offering her the chance to confirm something he'd already decided was true. Marion looked at him steadily. "What makes you ask that?" she said. His jaw shifted slightly. "Because when I said my name on that street, something changed in your face. And you didn't ask me what I did or who I was. You already knew enough not to need to." Smart man. She'd suspected that. She wasn't surprised. What surprised her was what came next. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the chair between them. A business card. Plain. Heavy stock. Nothing but a number. "I don't know what happened," he said quietly, "or what my family did. But I want to." Marion looked at the card. Did not pick it up. "Why?" she asked. "Because my son is alive because of you." He held her gaze. "And because I've spent enough of my life not asking questions I should have asked." She said nothing for a long moment. Then she picked up the card. She didn't say yes. She didn't say anything. But Min-ho looked at her with something careful and raw in his eyes, and she understood they were not finished, not even close to finished, and that whatever came next would not be simple for either of them. Strong women recognize strong women. If these are the kinds of stories that speak to you, this channel was made to be your space. Ji-ho was sitting up in the hospital bed with a bandage above his left eye and a cup of orange juice he wasn't drinking, just holding, like the cup itself was doing something useful. He looked at Marion the way children look at people who have been important to them in a moment they can't fully explain. Openly, without embarrassment, like recognition didn't need to justify itself. "You're the lady from the street," he said. "I am," Marion said. "You talked to me." "I did." He considered this. Then, most people just watched. Marion sat in the chair beside his bed. Min-ho stood near the door, slightly back, giving them the space. And she noticed how deliberately he'd positioned himself outside the moment instead of inside it. "How do you feel?" she asked Ji-ho. "My head hurts." He said it practically, without complaint. "The doctor said I have a concussion. I looked it up on the nurse's tablet. It means my brain got shaken." "That's basically right." "Does it go away?" "It does," she said. "You rest, drink water, stay off screens. You'll be back to normal before you know it." He nodded, processing this with the kind of seriousness that some children carry, the kind that usually means they've learned early to handle information on their own. Then he said, without looking up from his juice cup, "My father doesn't usually come when I get hurt." The room went very still. Marion didn't react outwardly, but she felt the sentence land, not just as information, but as the specific weight it carried. Said without accusation, without performance. Just a fact this boy had organized into his understanding of the world. Min-ho, near the door, said nothing, but she heard the slight shift of his weight. "He came tonight," Marion said carefully. "Yeah." Ji-ho looked up at her. He looked scared. I've never seen him look scared before. She held the boy's gaze. Sometimes it takes something big to remind people what matters. Ji-ho thought about this with the gravity of someone who wasn't sure whether to believe it, but wanted to. After a few minutes, a nurse came to check his vitals, and Min-ho stepped into the hallway. Marian followed. The corridor was quieter out here. Fluorescent and honest. Min-ho stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed, looking at nothing specific. He'd loosened his tie at some point, the only visible concession to the fact that the night had cost him something. "He's a perceptive kid," Marian said. "Too perceptive." Min-ho exhaled slowly through his nose. "He's been that way since he was 3. Notices everything. Says it plainly. That's not a flaw." "No," he said. "It isn't." Silence. She could feel him working toward something, building toward a question or a disclosure, and she had enough experience with powerful men to know when they were negotiating with themselves. "I've heard your name," he said finally, not looking at her yet. "Inside the family. Years ago." Marian kept her face still. "Not warmly," he added. He said it directly, with something that cost him, an honesty she hadn't expected from him this fast. "I wouldn't imagine so," she said. Now he looked at her. "I didn't ask back then why your name came up or what the context was. I had my own." He paused. "My own part of the business to manage. I didn't involve myself in Dae-jun's operations. And now my son is alive because of a woman whose name my family spoke with dismissal." His voice was level, but there was an edge beneath it, not directed at her. At himself, maybe. Or at something older. "I think that requires me to ask questions I should have asked a long time ago." She studied him. There was something she believed in what he was saying, and something she was reserving judgment on. That was honest. That was where she was. "I'm not looking for anything from your family," she said. "I know," he said. "That's partly why I'm telling you this." She could feel the weight of everything unsaid between them. The years, the history, the specific shape of what Dae-jun had done and how it had traveled through her life like a fracture travels through glass. Min-ho didn't know all of it. But he knew something. And the fact that he was standing in a hospital corridor choosing honesty over protection was not nothing. "Ellis," he said quietly. "Just her name. Said the way you say something you've been carrying in your mouth for a while, something you finally decide to put down." "You know who I am," she said. "I know enough," he said, "to know that I don't know nearly enough." She left the hospital an hour later. Alone, as she'd arrived. But on the drive home, she sat at a red light and let herself feel the full strangeness of the evening. The boy, the rain, Min-ho's face, the way her name had sounded in his voice. Not like an erasure. Like a question he was genuinely trying to answer. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't answer. But she didn't delete it either. And that, she knew, meant something. Because Marian Ellis did not hold onto things by accident. This channel is for women who know what it means to rebuild quietly, without an audience. If that sounds like your story, I'd love for you to stay. Some stories are not just about what happens. They're about the strength it takes to stand your ground, to protect your dignity, and to demand respect, even when the world tries to take it from you. If you've ever had to make a choice that tested your courage, or refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside, then you're in the right place. This channel tells stories about women who cannot be broken, and the people who learn, sometimes too late, that integrity cannot be bought. Welcome to Afro Korean Tales and Stories. 7 years ago, Marian Ellis landed at Incheon Airport with 2 suitcases, a leather portfolio, and the specific kind of confidence that comes not from arrogance but from preparation. She had done everything right. Her credentials were impeccable. Her Mandarin was conversational, her understanding of East Asian business markets precise. Her strategy work already cited in 2 international trade publications. She'd been recruited directly, not through an agency, not through a referral, but because Lee Group's head of international development had read a white paper she wrote and called her personally. That call had felt like a rival. She understood, walking into the Lee Group headquarters that first morning, that she would need to prove herself twice over. Once for being foreign, once for being a black woman in a room where nobody looked like her. She had done that before. She knew how to hold the room without demanding it, how to let the work speak before she spoke, how to be patient without being invisible. What she hadn't prepared for was Dae-jun. Lee Dae-jun was 51 that year, silver-haired, immaculately composed, with a kind of social fluency that reads as warmth until you realize it has never once produced actual warmth. He welcomed her to the company in front of the full executive floor, said all the right things in 2 languages, and shook her hand with both of his. And then, methodically, over a period of 14 months, he dismantled her. Not loudly. That wasn't his style. It was architectural, like she'd thought about it years later. The way you don't knock down a wall, you just quietly remove the support underneath it. He started by inserting himself into her presentations. Not replacing her, just positioning himself adjacent, asking the first question, reframing her conclusions in his own language, adding caveats that subtly shifted credit. It was subtle enough that she questioned herself the first few times. Wondered if she was being too sensitive, too quick to see pattern in coincidence. She wasn't. By the 4th month, her direct reports had been reassigned without explanation. By the 6th, her project briefings were being routed through Dae-jun's office before reaching the board. By the 8th, she walked into a quarterly review and found her own 6-week framework presented on the screen under a different heading, with Dae-jun standing at the front of the room explaining it to people who had once sat in meetings where she'd built it from nothing. She waited until the room cleared. Then she walked up to him. "That was my work," she said. Quietly. Directly. No theater. Dae-jun looked at her with something that was exactly calibrated to resemble confusion. "I'm sorry. The international restructuring pipeline. The partner tiering system. The risk distribution model. I built those. All 3. Over 6 weeks. And you presented them to the board this morning without my name attached to any of it." He tilted his head slightly. Smiled the way someone smiles when they're deciding how much effort a response deserves. "Ms. Ellis," he said, "you contributed preliminary concepts that were then developed by our team into viable strategy. That's how collaborative work functions here. If that distinction is uncomfortable for you, perhaps we should discuss whether this environment is the right fit." She stood very still. "I understand you," she said. "Good," he said, and walked out. She didn't cry in that corridor. She made a decision instead. She spent 3 weeks documenting everything, every email, every draft, every meeting note, every timestamp. She brought it to the head of HR, who listened carefully and told her the matter would be reviewed. She never heard back. The following week, her office keycard stopped working. No termination letter. No formal conversation. Just, access, revoked. Her belongings boxed and waiting at reception. A severance check that was insultingly small and structured in a way that required her to sign a non-disclosure agreement to receive it. She did not sign it. She flew home with the same 2 suitcases and less of everything else. And she rebuilt. She built consulting clients. She built a reputation. She built a life in Los Angeles that was genuinely hers. No borrowed credit, no institutional permission, just the work and the results and the trust she'd earned one client at a time. She told herself she was done with the Lee family. And she had been. Mostly. Except for the file she'd kept. Not out of obsession, out of accuracy. Out of the refusal to let her own history be rewritten just because no one else was watching. The present pulled her back in now. The hospital, the boy, Minho's face in the rain. She opened her laptop at the kitchen table and sat with the old file for a long time. Not reading it. Just acknowledging it. The pattern she'd seen in the Lee family's home, the staff who moved without eye contact, Jiho's quiet statement about his father not coming, it wasn't new. It was familiar. The same architecture. Different rooms. Dae-jun's influence didn't stay in boardrooms. It lived in the marrow of the family. And Minho, whatever he was or wasn't, had grown up inside of it. Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time she answered. "Ms. Ellis." Minho's voice. Measured. But something underneath it. Something that hadn't been there in the hospital. Something that sounded like urgency being held at arm's length. I need you to know something before you decide whether to be involved in any of this, he said. About my brother. About what he did. Marian's grip on the phone tightened slightly. I'm listening, she said. It's worse than you know. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, packed with 7 years of things she'd carried alone, and the specific terror of learning they were heavier than she thought. If you're a woman who has ever rebuilt yourself from nothing and refused to let anyone rewrite your story, these are the stories told here. You're welcome on this channel. Min-ho did not come alone. Marian had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the house. Not the size of it, which she'd anticipated, but the coldness. The kind of cold that money can't fix because it isn't about temperature. It's about what's been chosen to fill the space, and what's been deliberately left out. She stood in the entrance hall and looked around once. Stone floors. High ceilings. Art that had been selected to impress rather than to mean anything. A formal dining room visible through open doors on the left. A sitting room on the right. Fresh flowers on a table that no one appeared to use. Min-ho stood beside her, watching her take it in. It's a formal house, he said. Like an apology that couldn't quite commit to being one. I can see that, she said. He led her to a sitting room at the back. Smaller, less staged than the rest of the house, with actual wear on the chair arms and a bookshelf that appeared to have been used. She appreciated that room more than she would have told him. Tea appeared without being requested. The staff member who brought it, a woman, 50s, with a kind of practiced silence that spoke of long training, placed the tray and left without making eye contact with either of them. Marian noticed. You said it was worse than I know, she said, once they were alone. She wrapped both hands around the teacup. I'm here. Min-ho sat across from her. He'd changed clothes since the hospital. Same composed surface. But something underneath it had shifted. The kind of shift that happens when a person has been awake long enough that their usual defenses are running on lower power. The night Ji-ho was hurt, he began. He wasn't supposed to be in that part of the city. Where was he supposed to be? At a private club. Family associates' property. He was being watched by one of Dae-jun's people. Min-ho's jaw tightened. That person left him. Marian was quiet. Left him, she repeated, to take a call. Then stayed on the call. Ji-ho wandered out to the street. 30 minutes before you found him. Min-ho set down his own cup carefully. The associate called Dae-jun, not me. Dae-jun told him to retrieve Ji-ho quietly before I found out. He paused. He didn't retrieve him fast enough. Marian processed this slowly, deliberately. So Dae-jun knew Ji-ho was missing and didn't call you. Correct. He prioritized keeping you uninformed over your son's safety. Min-ho's expression didn't change. But something in the stillness of his face told her that he'd spent the past 24 hours sitting with exactly that sentence. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I need someone outside this family to know the truth. Someone who can't be managed. He looked at her directly. And because you deserve to understand what you walked into on that street. It wasn't a random accident. It was the consequence of my brother's choices. She sat with that. It aligned. She knew, in the specific way that experience teaches you, that this was not manipulation or performance. This was a man choosing disclosure over protection, and doing it with the understanding that it cost him something. But she also knew enough not to fully trust a man she'd met 24 hours ago, regardless of how his grief looked. Where is Dae-jun now? She asked. In this house, Min-ho said. The temperature of the room seemed to drop a precise degree. You brought me here, she said slowly, knowing he was here. I brought you here, Min-ho said, because this is where the truth lives. And I wanted you to be in the room when it stopped being avoidable. Footsteps in the hallway. Measured. Unhurried. The kind of footsteps that announce themselves on purpose. The door opened. Lee Dae-jun walked in. He was older than she remembered. The silver she'd last seen at his temples had taken everything now. But the posture was identical. The composure. The way his presence immediately reconfigured the room's architecture. The way a stone changes the current of water simply by being in it. He stopped when he saw Marian. For one unguarded instant, less than a second, something moved across his face. Not guilt. Not surprise. Something more complex. The expression of a man who has spent years not thinking about something and has just looked up to find it standing in his sitting room. Then the mask closed again. Seamless. Practiced. Min-ho, he said, in Korean. Then, shifting with polished deliberateness to English, I wasn't aware we had a guest. Min-ho said nothing. The silence was its own statement. Dae-jun turned to Marion. Extended his hand. Ms. Ellis. His voice was warm, courteous, and absolutely precise. What an unexpected pleasure. She looked at his hand. She shook it. Because she was not the 29-year-old woman standing in a Seoul corridor anymore. She was a woman who had walked back into this orbit deliberately, who had sat with her file and her history and made a clear-eyed decision. And she was not going to give Dae-jun the satisfaction of knowing that even for one moment, her hands wanted to do something other than what she chose. Mr. Lee, she said. Dae-jun held her handshake one beat longer than necessary. Then released it. Moved to take the chair at the head of the small sitting room arrangement. Of course he did, and settled into it with the ease of a man who takes the head of every room. I understand we owe you a considerable debt, he said. Regarding Ji-ho. You don't owe me anything, Marion said. Modesty, Dae-jun said with a slight smile. I remember that about you. Min-ho's gaze moved to his brother. There was a warning in it. Quiet, but present. Dae-jun received it and chose to do nothing with it, which was itself a choice. It's been. Dae-jun looked at the ceiling briefly, as though calculating. 7 years? 8. 7, Marion said. Time, he said pleasantly. You look well. She looked at him steadily. You said Ji-ho's situation is more complicated than it appears. That there are things the family has chosen to handle privately. Min-ho turned slightly. She could tell this wasn't something he'd expected her to open with. Good. She wasn't here to be managed by either of them. Dae-jun's smile didn't leave, but it adjusted. Recalibrated. Family matters, he said smoothly, are best understood from the inside. Some family matters, Marion said, have a way of landing on the street. Literally. The smile stopped. For just a moment, in the clean quiet of that cold, expensive room, Dae-jun looked at Marion Ellis the way he had not looked at her in Seoul. Not through her, not past her. At her. With the first real attention he had ever given her. And she held it without blinking. Min-ho set down his teacup with a sound that broke the silence. Both of them looked at him. Dae-jun, he said quietly. There are things that need to be said tonight. All of them. His brother's eyes moved back to Marion. Something shifted there. The faintest calculation. A man identifying the exact shape of a problem he thought he'd already solved. Of course, Dae-jun said pleasantly. But his hand, resting on the chair arm, had closed into something that was almost a fist. Nobody moved for a moment. The sitting room held the three of them in a specific kind of tension, the kind that has weight, that you can feel against your skin like a change in air pressure. Min-ho sat forward slightly. Dae-jun sat back. Marion sat still. She had been in rooms like this before. Rooms where civility was a performance everyone was committed to maintaining right up until the moment they weren't. She knew how to wait inside that performance without disappearing into it. Tell me about the associate, she said. Directly to Dae-jun. His expression remained pleasant. I'm not sure what Min-ho has shared with you, Ms. Ellis, but family security arrangements are. Your son's security arrangement, Min-ho said. Low and flat. Not a correction. A correction. Dae-jun adjusted. Ji-ho is well. That's what matters. Ji-ho was alone on a wet street in the dark. Marion kept her voice even. Because someone your brother trusted left him there. And your brother's first call was to you. Not to his father. Dae-jun looked at her with the particular attention of a man recalibrating how much intelligence he's dealing with. You seem very informed for someone who arrived here this evening for the first time, he said. I seem informed, she said, because Min-ho told me the truth. Something moved across Dae-jun's face, quick and dark and directed at his brother. Minho received it without changing expression. The associate made an error, Daejun said. It's been addressed internally. Addressed how? Marian asked. Internally, he repeated. Same word. Different weight. A door being closed. She nodded once, like she was filing that answer somewhere useful. The room settled back into its surface calm. Daejun reached for the tea that had been brought for him without request. The staff had known, of course, and lifted the cup with the ease of a man resuming a pace that had never been genuinely interrupted. Then Ji-ho came in. He appeared in the doorway in pajamas and socked feet, his bandaged forehead slightly pink at the edges, holding a worn stuffed animal that was too young for him in the way children sometimes keep things that were given to them before the world started asking them to grow up. He saw Marian, and his face did something simple and immediate. Lit up, the way faces do when they find something they didn't know they were looking for. You came, he said. I came, she said. He crossed the room directly to her and stood beside her chair with a naturalness that required no permission, no navigation. Just proximity. Marian noticed Minho watching his son from across the room with an expression she recognized. The particular look of a man watching something happen that he knows he caused to be impossible for too long. Daejun watched Ji-ho too. But differently. She couldn't have named the difference precisely except that it was there, and it was not warm. Ji-ho, Daejun said, in Korean. A measured, not unkind redirection. The word that followed she didn't know, but the tone was clear. Not now, not here, back to your room. Ji-ho looked at his uncle, then back at Marian. Can she stay? He asked. In English. For her benefit, she realized. He'd switched languages on purpose. The room felt the weight of that small, deliberate act. That's up to Ms. Ellis, Minho said. I'll stay a little longer, Marian said to the boy. Ji-ho nodded, satisfied, and sat on the floor beside her chair without fanfare. Daejun looked at the child on the floor, then at Marian, then set his cup down with a soundlessness that was more controlled than casual. You have a way with him, he said to her. Smooth. Observational. The kind of compliment that is also a probe. He's easy to be kind to, she said. Children usually are. He tilted his head slightly. Before the world starts asking things of them. She looked at him. Some people ask things of them too early. He smiled. Some children are stronger than they appear. It sounded like a compliment about Ji-ho. It wasn't. Minho stood abruptly. Not aggressively, but with enough intention that both Daejun and Marian looked at him. Ji-ho, he said quietly, in English this time. Go with Mrs. Park. I'll come up in 20 minutes. Ji-ho looked at Marian once more, then rose without argument. She touched his shoulder lightly as he passed. Small gesture, meant only for him. When the door closed, the room changed. No child to hold the surface together. Just 3 adults and everything that had accumulated between them across 7 years and one very particular night. Daejun spoke first. I imagine Minho has made this evening sound rather dramatic. He hasn't, Marian said. You have. A pause. Real this time. I've been patient, she continued. I came here tonight because Minho asked me to, and because I respect the sincerity of what he said. But I'm not interested in spending the evening in a room with you while you manage the narrative. She let that land. If there's something true to be said, say it. If there isn't, I'll go. Daejun looked at her with the undivided attention of a man who has not been spoken to this way in a very long time. Possibly ever, in this house. Then he said something she didn't expect. Ji-ho has been in that situation before. Marian went still. Not this badly, Daejun continued. But the carelessness, the gap in coverage. This isn't the first time the boy has been in a position where he shouldn't have been. He said it with a composed regret that she almost believed. The family has managed it. Quietly. As we manage things. Minho's voice came from across the room. Quiet. Tight. You told me it was the first time. Daejun turned to his brother. I managed it, Minho. So that you didn't have to. So that I didn't know, Minho said. The correction hung in the air between the brothers. clean and cold and final. Dae-jun didn't dispute it. He folded his hands in his lap and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Marian watched Min-ho absorb this. Watched the specific way a man absorbs a betrayal from someone he grew up trusting. Not loudly, but in stages, the way the ground settles after something beneath it has given way. And in that silence, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in 7 years. Not anger. Something more dangerous than anger. The certainty that she had been right. All along. About all of it. And the knowledge, sitting low and precise in her chest, that she now had a witness. Tell her, Min-ho said. All of it. Dae-jun didn't move. Didn't blink. He sat in that chair like a man who had survived every room he'd ever been in by simply refusing to be dislodged from it. Marian had already picked up her coat. That was what broke it open. Not Min-ho's voice, not the weight of the evening, not even the revelation about Ji-ho. It was the coat. The simple, quiet act of a woman preparing to leave. Again. Min-ho watched her lift it from the arm of the chair and felt something tear loose in his chest. Something he couldn't have named but recognized immediately, the way you recognize a sound you heard once as a child and never forgot. He turned to his brother. Dae-jun. Min-ho, this is not the appropriate. Tell her the truth. Quieter this time. More final. Or I will. Dae-jun looked at his younger brother for a long moment. In Korean families, in this family specifically, the elder brother's authority was not merely cultural courtesy. It was structural. It was the architecture of every decision that had ever been made under this roof. Min-ho had never, in 43 years, turned that architecture against him directly. Until now. Something in Dae-jun's face moved. Barely. But Marian saw it. He set his cup down, folded his hands, and began. The full account came out in pieces, not volunteered, but extracted, the way you extract something embedded. The negligent associate had been in Dae-jun's employ for 6 years. His job, officially, was logistics coordination. Unofficially, he handled situations that required discretion over documentation. Ji-ho had been placed in his care on 3 separate occasions when Min-ho was traveling and the boy's mother, long since absent from the picture, was unavailable. 3 occasions. Not 1. On 2 of those 3 nights, Ji-ho had been left unsupervised for periods ranging from 40 minutes to 2 hours. Dae-jun had known each time. Marian sat back down. Not because she'd been moved emotionally, because she needed to be still enough to hear every word without missing any of it. Min-ho stood with his back against the wall, arms at his sides, listening with the controlled stillness of a man who is not going to let himself break until he is alone. Why? He asked, when Dae-jun finished. The associate was useful, Dae-jun said. Replacing him would have required explanation. Why? Min-ho said again. Did you not tell me? Dae-jun looked at his brother with something that was almost honest. Because you would have shut down everything he was managing. And there were things being managed that the family needed managed. More than my son's safety. It wasn't a question. Dae-jun didn't answer it as one. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Marian had heard all evening. She looked at Dae-jun. He was watching Min-ho with the expression of a man who has made a calculation and is now waiting to see whether it was correct. Not guilt. Assessment. That was what she needed to see. In Seoul, she said. Both men looked at her. The International Restructuring Project. The partner tiering system. The risk model. She kept her voice even. Walk me through your decision to present my work as yours. Dae-jun turned to her with the kind of composure that requires years of maintenance. Ms. Ellis, that was a complex collaborative. Don't, she said. One word. Flat and final. He stopped. I have every draft, she said. Every email. Every version with my name on it and every version where my name was removed. I kept all of it. She looked at him steadily. I have 7 years of documentation. I kept it because I knew, eventually, this conversation would happen. I just didn't know where. Dae-jun looked at her with completely new eyes. The mask was still there, but something behind it had shifted. The shift of a man who has just learned that what he believed was a closed account has been accruing interest for 7 years. "You planned this," he said slowly. "No," she said. "I prepared. There's a difference. I didn't plan to save your nephew on a wet street. But I planned for the day I'd be in a room with you again." She paused. "That day is today." Min-ho looked at her. In his eyes, not admiration, exactly. Something more complicated. The look of a man who is watching someone demonstrate a quality of character he thought he understood and is realizing he underestimated entirely. Dae-jun said nothing for 10 full seconds. Then, "What do you want, Ms. Ellis?" "That," she said, "is exactly the right question." She let it sit there, unanswered. For now. Because she'd waited 7 years. She could wait another hour. If you've ever prepared quietly for the moment you'd finally be heard, this channel understands that kind of patience. Stay with us. The documents were real. That was the thing Dae-jun hadn't accounted for. He had managed his version of events for so long, polished it, reinforced it, made sure it was the version that existed in official memory, that somewhere along the way he had made the mistake powerful men often make. He had confused his version with the truth. Marion opened her bag and placed a single folder on the table between them. Not the full file. She wasn't here to overwhelm. She was here to demonstrate. There is a difference, and she understood it precisely. Inside the folder, 3 documents. The original strategy framework dated 14 months before Dae-jun's presentation to the board. An internal email thread in which she outlined all 3 components in full, sent to her direct supervisor, time-stamped, with red receipts. And a comparative analysis, prepared 2 years ago by a third-party intellectual property attorney, showing structural and linguistic overlap between her original documents and the Lee Group's officially credited materials. She had paid for that analysis herself. She'd treated it like insurance she hoped she would never need. Min-ho leaned forward and looked at the documents without touching them. Dae-jun sat back. He glanced at the folder once and then looked away, which told Marion everything. He had seen it. He had understood immediately what it represented. And he had chosen not to engage with it directly, which was his tell, the thing that happened when his usual tools of charm and redirection had nowhere to go. "This is not the appropriate venue to discuss," he began. "Then tell me the appropriate venue," Marion said. "I've been waiting 7 years for someone to tell me where I was supposed to go. Legal matters require." "I haven't filed anything," she said. "I want you to understand that. I'm not here with lawyers. I'm not here with a settlement demand." She looked at him directly. "I'm here because your nephew is alive. And I think, on some level, you understand that the least this family owes me is the truth spoken out loud in a room. Without management. Without redirection." Dae-jun looked at the folder again. Min-ho said quietly, "How much?" Both Marion and Dae-jun looked at him. "How much was taken?" Min-ho said. "Financially. Professionally. I want to understand the full scope." Marion looked at Min-ho for a moment. She appreciated the directness. She also understood what it was, a man trying to find a transaction he could complete, because transactions were cleaner than reckoning. "The financial loss is quantifiable," she said. "The professional damage is harder." The Lee Group's international crediting of that work closed 3 doors for me directly. A contract in Singapore, a speaking platform in London, and a partnership with a firm in Chicago that had specifically cited the strategy framework as work they wanted to build on. Once the credit was attributed to your family's internal team, I had no grounds to claim the connection. She paused. Let the numbers settle in the room. "Conservatively," she said, "those 3 opportunities represent somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 in lost earnings. That's conservative." Min-ho didn't blink. Dae-jun's left hand, resting on the chair arm, made a movement she caught, not quite a flinch but close. "Beyond the money," she continued, "there are 6 years of professional history where my name doesn't appear on work I created. That has a cost that doesn't fit in a column." The room was very quiet. "I can make arrangements," Min-ho said. "Full restitution. Whatever number you name, I will." "I know you can," Marion said. That's not what I'm asking for. He stopped. Then what? He said. Not impatiently. With genuine effort to understand something that was clearly outside his existing framework. She looked at him with the patience of a woman who has rehearsed this moment not in anger but in clarity. I want my name back, she said. Not a check. My name. Attached to the work I did. Publicly. In the professional record. And I want Dae-jun to be the one to authorize it. The air shifted. Dae-jun turned to look at her fully. For the first time all evening, he wasn't managing. He was simply looking. At the woman across from him. At what she actually was. She could see him thinking. Calculating. She could see the moment he reached for his usual response and found nothing there that would work. And she could see, in the long, careful pause that followed, the first fracture. Not remorse yet. Just the recognition that he was out of moves, and that she knew it, and that this was, in a way he had not experienced in a very long time, a room he was not going to control. Min-ho stood. He walked to the window. Stood with his back to both of them. Dae-jun, he said. I need you to think very carefully about what you say next. Dae-jun looked at the back of his brother's head. Then at Marion. Then at the folder on the table. Then he said something she had not predicted. There's more, he said quietly. More than what's in that folder. Marion went still. What do you mean? She said. The Singapore contract, Dae-jun said. It didn't close because of attribution. He met her eyes. It closed because I made a call. The sentence sat in the room like something dropped from a height. She had always suspected. She had never been able to prove it. Now she didn't need to. If you're a woman who has ever watched someone take what you built and call it theirs, you already know what Marion felt in that moment. This channel is for you. Min-ho turned around slowly. He looked at his brother the way you look at someone when you are rearranging everything you thought you knew about them and finding the new arrangement worse than you imagined. You called Singapore, he said. Dae-jun didn't deny it. I made a business decision. You destroyed her contract. Deliberately. I protected the family's position. The Singapore firm had begun asking questions about original authorship. If they had pursued it. You buried her, Min-ho said. To protect yourself. Dae-jun's expression remained composed, but there was something behind his eyes now, something that had been released by the act of confession and couldn't be put back. I made a decision consistent with the family's interests at the time. Don't. Min-ho stepped forward. Don't phrase it that way in front of her. Dae-jun looked at his brother. A long, measuring look. The kind that exists between men who grew up in the same house and have spent decades navigating the specific power of that shared history. You have always been sentimental, Dae-jun said quietly. It has always been your liability. And you have always confused ruthlessness with intelligence, Min-ho said. It has always been yours. The room held its breath. Marion watched the brothers without moving. She had grown up an only child. She had no framework for what she was witnessing, this particular combination of love and damage that only exists between people bound by blood and opposing natures. But she understood the weight of it. She could feel it pressing down on the room. She made a decision. I need to say something, she said. Both men looked at her. And I need both of you to hear it. She stood. Not for effect. Because what she was about to say required her to be upright. I am not interested in destroying this family, she said. I want to be clear about that. What Dae-jun did cost me significantly. Financially, professionally, in ways that took years to rebuild. And the Singapore call, she paused, steadied herself. That was not a business decision. That was targeted. And it caused real harm. Dae-jun looked at her steadily. His face was unreadable, but he was listening. She had his full attention in a way she'd never had it in Seoul. But I am not here for destruction, she continued. I am here for correction. There is a difference. And the correction I want is specific. She turned to Min-ho. I want a formal, written acknowledgement that the international restructuring framework, the partner tiering system, and the risk distribution model were originated by me. I want that acknowledgement filed with the Lee Group's internal record and shared with the 3 professional bodies that currently credit your family's internal team. Min-ho nodded once. Done. She turned to Dae-jun. And I want to hear from you, directly, that you made that call to Singapore. Not in this room. In writing. Addressed to the firm. The silence stretched. Dae-jun looked at his hands. At the folder on the table. At some point on the floor between them that none of them could actually see. In Korean culture, the version Dae-jun had been built by, the act of public acknowledgement was not simply an apology. It was the dismantling of face. Of the curated image that a man of his position spent a lifetime constructing. It was the most costly thing she could have asked of him. She knew that. She had thought about it for 7 years. She had asked it anyway. Because dignity did not negotiate. If I do this, Dae-jun said carefully, what happens to what I've told you tonight? About Ji-ho. About the associate. Marion looked at him. That's between you and your brother. I won't carry that into another room. But I will tell you that Ji-ho deserves a father who knows the full truth of what happened to him. That part is not mine to decide. Min-ho said nothing. But his jaw shifted in a way that told her he'd already made that decision, and it had been made before this conversation started. Dae-jun was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Give me until tomorrow." "You have until tomorrow morning," Marion said. "After that, I'll take the next step on my own terms." She picked up the folder, returned it to her bag, set the strap on her shoulder. Dae-jun watched her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face in 7 years of memories and 7 hours of this evening. She couldn't be certain, but it looked, underneath everything, like the beginning of something he hadn't planned for. Respect. Reluctant. Incomplete. But present. Min-ho walked her to the door. In the hallway, away from his brother, something changed in him. The controlled surface thinned. "He'll do it," Min-ho said quietly. "I'll make sure." "I believe you," she said. And she meant it. He looked at her. "I'm sorry. For my family. For all of it. I know that isn't enough." "It's a start," she said. "Take care of your son, Min-ho. That's the most important thing right now." She walked out to her car in the dark. The night air was cool and clean. She sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting the engine. Her phone buzzed. An email notification. Unknown sender. The subject line read, "You should know what Min-ho hasn't told you." She stared at the screen. Then she opened it. Strong women know that the reckoning is never over when it looks like it's over. If you want to see how Marion handles what comes next, don't go anywhere. The email had no signature. 4 sentences. Clean, deliberate, the kind of writing that takes effort to make look effortless. Min-ho knew about the Singapore call 2 years ago. He chose to protect the family then. His interest in justice now is not what it appears. Ask him about the Meridian Group. Marion read it 3 times. Then she set the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat with the dark for a moment. She was not a woman who panicked. She was a woman who assessed. And what she was assessing right now was the distance between what she'd felt in that hallway 20 minutes ago, the specific, grounded feeling of trusting Min-ho's sincerity, and what this email was trying to do to that feeling. Those were 2 different problems. The first was whether Min-ho had told her the truth. The second was who wanted her to doubt him, and why right now. She drove home without calling anyone. In the morning, before she did anything else, she searched the Meridian Group. It took 11 minutes to find what she was looking for. Meridian was a US-based investment firm with significant Korean capital backing. They had attempted to acquire a mid-sized strategy consultancy in Chicago 3 years ago, the same Chicago firm that had tried to partner with Marion before that door closed. The acquisition failed. The Chicago firm folded. Min-ho's name appeared nowhere in the Meridian Group's public documentation. Dae-jun's did. She sat with that. Turned it over. Looked at it from different angles, the way you look at something you're trying to date, trying to determine whether it was old damage or new. Her phone rang. Min-ho. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Good morning." "He'll do it," Min-ho said. No greeting. The written acknowledgement, Dae-jun agreed this morning. All 3 documents. He wants 2 weeks to coordinate the language with the relevant professional bodies. He has 1, Marion said. A pause. I can push for that. Min-ho. She kept her voice level. Tell me about the Meridian Group. The pause that followed was different from the first one. Longer. More specific. Where did you hear that name? He said. Does it matter? He was quiet for 4 full seconds. She counted. Meridian was a vehicle Dae-jun used for 3 acquisitions between 2019 and 2022, he said finally. I became aware of its connection to Dae-jun approximately 2 years ago. And the Chicago firm. Another pause. Yes. You knew, she said. Not accusatory. Just clear. I knew Dae-jun had used Meridian to apply pressure in certain markets. I didn't know the Chicago firm's collapse was direct fallout until 8 months ago. His voice was steady but careful. When I found out, I confronted him. That's when I began pulling certain operations from his oversight. You didn't tell me last night. No. Why? Because I was asking you to trust me, he said. And I knew that information would make that harder. And I told myself that was a reason to wait. He paused. I understand, hearing it out loud, that it wasn't. Marion said nothing for a moment. This was the thing about intelligent men with complicated histories. They were rarely entirely dishonest. They were selective. They withheld not to deceive but to manage, to control the timing of what you knew so they could control the shape of your reaction. It was a different thing from lying. But it wasn't honesty. I need to ask you something directly, she said. Ask it. Is your interest in correcting what was done to me genuine? Or is there something this family needs for my silence or cooperation that is driving this? The question landed where it was meant to. The latter would make more strategic sense, he said. I want you to know I'm aware of that. I'm aware of how this looks. A beat. What I can tell you is that the night on that street, watching you hold my son in the rain while people with more resources than you stood and filmed, something changed in me that I can't reverse. Whether that's enough for you, I can't control. She looked out the window. A neighbor was walking a dog. A completely ordinary morning existing right beside everything that wasn't ordinary. The 1-week timeline stands, she said. Understood. And Min-ho, if there's anything else I should know, tell me now. Not because I'm threatening you. Because I am willing to see this through, and I cannot do that on information that arrives in pieces. He was quiet. Then, there's one more thing. She waited. The associate who left Ji-ho that night. Dae-jun hasn't removed him from his operations. He told me he had. He hasn't. The ground shifted again. Differently this time. Not beneath Marion, beneath Min-ho. Then you have a decision to make, she said. That one isn't about me. She ended the call. Sat still. Thought about what it meant that someone had sent her that email. Someone inside the family, or close enough to it to know about Meridian and to know that she was becoming a problem that needed to be made complicated. Dae-jun was the obvious answer. But Dae-jun was the kind of man who solved problems by removing them, not by making them doubt their allies. That email was a different style. Subtler. More patient. She picked up her phone and called her attorney. Pull everything you can find on a man named Lee Dae-jun, she said. Cross-reference Meridian Group. And find me whatever exists on any legal entity connected to the Lee family in the last 5 years. Are we building a case? We're building a picture, she said. I want to know what I'm actually looking at before I decide what to do with it. She ended the call. Looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she got dressed. Because whatever came next, she was going to meet it standing. If you're a woman who knows the difference between being managed and being respected, you'll understand exactly why Marion made that call. These stories are for you. The acknowledgement was published on a Thursday. Not buried in a footnote. Not softened into something unrecognizable. 3 paragraphs, formally structured, distributed to the Lee Group's professional contacts, the Singapore firm, the London platform, and the Chicago Industry Board that had filed the original attribution. Marian read it at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee she didn't drink. Her name, in clear language, attached to the work she had done. The framework, the tiering system, the risk model, all three credited fully to Marian Ellis, independent strategy consultant, originator. Dae-jun had signed it. She read it a second time. Not for the content. For the feeling of it, trying to locate what she expected to feel. Triumph. Maybe. Or relief. Or the particular release that comes when something held tightly for a long time is finally set down. What she felt was quieter than any of that. It felt like accuracy. Like the record being corrected to match what had always been true. It wasn't victory. It was just rightness. The world rearranging itself back into its proper shape. Her phone had been ringing since 9 that morning. Former colleagues. A journalist she'd worked with in London. The director of the Chicago board, who spoke for 4 minutes about institutional accountability and spoke with the careful enthusiasm of a man who recognized a story he wanted to be adjacent to. She didn't take most of the calls. Not yet. The one she did take was from a woman she'd mentored 6 years ago, a young strategist named Priya who had built her own consulting firm from scratch and who had, at several difficult points, named Marian as the reason she hadn't quit. "I saw it this morning," Priya said. Marian, are you okay?" "I am," Marian said. That took courage. More than most people will understand. "It took patience," Marian said. "Courage is the easy part." Priya laughed. A warm, watery sound. "Only you would say that." After the call, Marian sat with the quiet for a while. Her apartment looked the same as it always had. Modest. Organized. The kind of space that reflects a person who values function over display. Good light, real books, nothing purchased to impress. She had built this life herself. Piece by piece. After soul. After the corridors and the keycard and the severance check she hadn't signed. She had not needed the acknowledgement to know who she was. But she had needed it to close what couldn't be closed without it. There is a difference between healing and resolving. She'd healed years ago. Today was resolution. Her buzzer rang at noon. Min-ho. She let him up. He came in without ceremony, looked around her apartment once with the expression of someone recalibrating their mental image of a person, and sat in the chair she indicated. He looked tired. The controlled surface was still present, but thinner. Like something had been running too long and needed rest. "It's done," he said. "I saw. Dae-jun had conditions. Initially. I removed the conditions." She looked at him. "How?" "By making it clear that cooperation was the only available option." He said it plainly. He understands now that I will not protect the family's reputation at the expense of what's right. That is a new understanding for him. It will take time for him to accept it fully. "And the associate." Min-ho's expression shifted. "Removed as of yesterday. Formally. With documentation. I have a copy for you if you want it." She studied his face. Looked for the performance. Couldn't find it. "The email," she said. "The one I received the night I left your house. Someone wanted me to doubt you." He nodded slowly. "I believe it was sent by someone in Dae-jun's outer circle. A lawyer he uses for certain matters. I can't prove it yet." He looked at her directly. "I want you to know I'm not going to ask you to ignore it or let it go. If you want to pursue it, I'll support that." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to pursue it," she said. "Not because it doesn't matter. Because I know what it was. It was a last attempt to make this messy. And I'm not interested in mess." Min-ho looked at her with something open in his expression. Something she'd seen flickers of across the past several days, but never this plainly. Not attraction. Not gratitude. Something more fundamental. The look of a man who has encountered a quality of person he didn't know existed in this specific form and is still in the process of adjusting to it. "Marian," he said, her first name, for the first time. She noticed. "Ji-ho has asked about you every day since the hospital." She felt something soften inside her chest. Small but real. "He's a remarkable kid," she said. "He is." Min-ho paused. He asked me why you helped him. When you didn't know who he was. When nobody else did. She looked at the window. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know. That I was still figuring that out. He paused. What would you have told him? She thought about it honestly. I'd tell him that some people are built to move toward trouble instead of away from it, she said. Not because they're fearless. Because standing still in a moment like that, that's the thing that would actually cost them. Minho absorbed this. Then he stood. He did not reach for her hand or her shoulder. He stood straight, and he bowed, slightly, deliberately, the specific formal inclination that in his culture carried weight beyond courtesy. It was acknowledgement. It was deference. It cost him something in the way that only meaningful gestures cost something. Dae-jun, she thought, would never have been able to do that. She received it without performance. Just a nod, equal, grounded. Take care of your son, she said. I will, he said. That I can promise you. He left. She heard the elevator. Then the quiet of her own apartment returning. She sat for a long time. Outside, the afternoon light was moving across the floor, slow and certain, the way light moves when nothing is chasing it. She had her name back. She had her record. She had done what she came to do. And she was, for the first time in 7 years, genuinely at rest inside that. This channel is for women who have fought long, quiet battles that no one fully witnessed. If you've been waiting to feel seen, stay. These stories are for you. 3 weeks later, Marion was leaving her office building on a Tuesday afternoon when she saw Ji-ho sitting on the front steps. Not with guards. Not with his father. Just a small boy in a school uniform with his backpack on his lap and his bandage gone now, a thin pink scar in its place, sitting on the steps like he'd been there long enough to get comfortable. She stopped walking. How did you get here? She said. My driver, he said. I told him to wait around the corner. He looked up at her without guilt. I wanted to talk to you. She looked at this child, this perceptive, serious, quietly remarkable child, and felt something that she couldn't have named when this all started but recognized clearly now. The specific kind of attachment that forms not through time but through intensity. Through having been held by someone in a moment of real danger. Through the particular honesty that passes between a child and a grown-up who has chosen to tell them the truth. Does your father know you're here? She asked. No, Ji-ho said. But he won't be mad. He's been trying to figure out how to bring me to see you for 2 weeks. A pause. He's bad at asking for things. I noticed, she said. She sat down on the steps beside him. He shifted to give her room, then leaned slightly in her direction. That unconscious proximity again, the unguarded thing. I wanted to ask you something, he said. Ask it. The night on the street. He looked straight ahead. Were you scared? She thought about answering quickly, then chose the honest version instead. Yes. Not for myself. For you. Why for me? Because you were small and hurt and alone, she said. And I didn't want you to feel more alone than you already did. Ji-ho was quiet for a moment. I don't feel alone now, he said. My dad eats dinner with me every night. He came to my school thing last week. He was late, but he came. He paused. It's different. She felt the weight of that. The specific, enormous significance of a child using the word different to describe his father choosing to show up. Good different? She asked. Yeah, he said simply. Good different. They sat on the steps for a few minutes without talking. A city moving around them. People passing. The ordinary world continuing at its ordinary pace. Then Ji-ho reached into his backpack and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her. She unfolded it. A drawing, in colored pencil. 2 figures on a street. Rain lines in gray. One figure was tall, in a blue coat, kneeling. The other was small, lying down. And above both of them, in the careful capital letters of a child who takes handwriting seriously. The lady who stayed. Marion looked at the drawing for a long time. She did not cry. She was not a woman who cried easily, And the drawing didn't produce tears so much as it produced something more structural, the feeling of being fully seen by someone who had no agenda in the seeing. No strategy. No debt or obligation. Just a child who remembered what had happened and wanted her to know that he remembered. "Thank you," she said. She folded it carefully. Put it in her bag. Ji-ho nodded like business had been completed. Then stood, adjusted his backpack straps. "My dad wants to have dinner sometime," he said. "With all three of us. He's not going to ask because he doesn't know how. But he wants to." He looked at her. "I thought you should know." She looked at this child. "I'll think about it," she said honestly. "Okay." He seemed satisfied with that. "Bye, Marion." He walked around the corner to his waiting car. She watched until he disappeared. Then she sat alone on the steps for a while. Just long enough to feel the full shape of what the last 3 weeks had been and what they had moved into. She had come back for justice. She had gotten it, not perfectly, not without complication, but genuinely. Her name was restored. The record was corrected. Daejun had been made to do something that cost him, and she had watched it cost him, and she had felt no cruelty in the watching, only the specific satisfaction of accuracy. And she had found, somewhere inside the process, something she hadn't been looking for. A child who trusted her. A man who was, slowly and imperfectly, learning to choose better. And the knowledge that her presence in that rain-soaked street had not only saved a boy's life but started a chain of corrections that would reach further than she'd planned. She stood, straightened her coat, looked out at the street. The city was loud and ordinary and alive around her. She was part of it, not despite everything she'd been through, but because of the way she'd moved through it. Without losing herself. Without making herself smaller. Without surrendering the thing that had always been. Through every difficulty and every corridor and every room where someone tried to erase her, entirely hers. Her dignity. She walked forward, not away from anything, toward whatever came next. Some battles aren't about winning. They're about refusing to lose yourself, and knowing, when it's over, that you didn't. Strong women recognize strong women. If these are the stories that speak to you, the ones about dignity, patience, and choosing yourself without apology, I'd love to have you on this channel. You belong here. Thank you for watching Afro Korean Tales and Stories. As we close this story, I want to say something to the women watching. Some of you have lived through moments like this. Moments where you had to stand alone. Moments where you chose dignity over comfort. Moments where you refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside. That kind of strength doesn't always make noise. But it changes rooms. If you are a woman who believes respect is worth more than money, if you believe character still matters, if you believe dignity should never be negotiated, then this channel was made for you. I tell stories about women who stand firm. Women who earn respect without begging for it. Women who remind powerful people that integrity cannot be purchased. If that speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community. And if this story touched you, comment the word dignity below. I read your comments, and they help these stories reach more women like you. Until the next story, remember, not every powerful person leads with honor, but every strong woman carries it within her. I'll see you in the next one.